This is the FEMA Substantial Damage Estimator Training Series. Welcome to Module 7, Percent Damage Estimations. In this unit, we will go into more detail on the process of estimating percent damages. Making these estimates is perhaps the most difficult part of using the SDE tool because it requires you to use your judgment to determine the most appropriate values for damage. We will provide guidance on estimating damage percentages to both residential and non-residential structures. There are many similarities in carrying out these two types of assessments, but there are some important differences we will point out as well. This guidance should be used as a starting point for inspectors, but it will not provide all the answers for every structure you are evaluating. There are a wide range of different structures across communities in the United States. And this guidance uses a one-story residential structure with no basement as a baseline. This is an excellent jumping-off point, but there will certainly be many variations from what we show and discuss in this module to what you will see in the field. This unit will give you guidance on how to identify likely indicators of damage and how to correlate the damage you identify with element percentages on a broad scale. As the inspector, you will ultimately need to rely on your best judgment based on what you see in the field. Remember not to overthink it. If you are inspecting a home where the flooring will need to be fully replaced in half the house, but the other half is in good shape, you would estimate the floor finish to be 50% damaged. Also, be sure to round all of your percent damage estimations to the nearest 5%. Many of the photos in the slides that follow are from damage that occurred in coastal areas. Please note that coastal floods may cause more scour and erosion around foundational systems. Some buildings in these areas may be designed to better resist scour and erosion, while others may not. This is something to be aware of as you are inspecting a structure. In the previous modules, we have discussed the various elements of a structure that you will be evaluating for damage. Those listed here are the elements that you will evaluate for residential structures. Non-residential structures will be evaluated based on somewhat fewer elements, but in both residential and non-residential structures, you will look at each element separately and make a percent damage determination within the SDE tool. The tool will then automatically calculate the overall damage percentage of the structure for you. We'll take a look at photos of some of the different ranges of damage for each element so that you have a baseline to work from when evaluating different structures. Although many of the photos show damage from flood events, damage from any source should be taken into account when evaluating a structure, not just damage from flooding. In most cases, you will look for the same indicators for other sources of damage as you would for flooding, so these photos provide a good example of what to look for in most cases. Foundation damage may differ depending on the source of damage that has impacted the structure, but in all cases, you'll want to look out for erosion, scour, cracks, and undermining of the foundation. In cases where you notice only limited scour or erosion, and there are not any noticeable cracks or separation between the foundation and superstructure, you'll likely want to mark the percentage as less than 25%. A structure with between 0 and 25% damage to the foundation can be seen in the left photo, where there is minimal damage to the piles on which the structure is elevated. There may have been some scour around the base of these piles, as there were clearly floodwaters around the house, as evidenced by the new staircase. If you notice some small cracks in the foundation, or if there is severe erosion or undermining of the foundation, you may increase your percent damage level to between 25% and 50%. The photo on the right shows a home whose foundation was held together with its superstructure, but which suffered serious erosion and some minor damage to the foundation itself. Foundation damage between 50% and 75% would be identified in cases where the foundation may initially appear intact, but in which there are actually significant structural issues that make the foundation unstable. The left photo shows a case where the home's foundation is still somewhat supporting the rest of the structure. However, upon closer examination, there were major cracks identified, and the foundation had shifted due to wave action and surge. In the right photo, we can see a structure whose foundation is damaged between 75 and 100%. Major parts of the foundation have been swept out from under the structure itself, and the structure is clearly no longer safe or supported. Note that the entire foundation does not necessarily have to have been washed away to indicate that the foundation is damaged at 100%. If the impacts are such that there is a partial or complete collapse of the structure, it is likely that the foundation will have to be completely replaced, which would mean damage should be marked at 100%. In terms of superstructure, homes that have minor damage to walls and studs but have not experienced major distortion or deformation to the bones of the building would likely be classified in the 0 to 25% damage range. These structures often appear similar to the structure in the left photo, where the superstructure generally remains unharmed aside from minor holes or incidental impact to the frame of the house. In homes where the damage should be classified in the 25 to 50% range, the impact to the structure tends to be a little more obvious. Often, siding has been torn off to expose the studs of the house and allow damage from wind or wind-blown objects. This can be seen in the right photo, in which some minor to moderate damage impacted the first floor of the superstructure, but most of the rest of the structure remains undamaged. Damage in the 50% to 75% range is more significant, and usually major portions of the stud walls have been destroyed. Other parts of the structure may remain solidly standing, but it is likely that there is at least some deformation of the frame of the structure that may cause some issues to the overall structural stability. In a home that is damaged between 75 and 100%, there is generally full-scale damage to the frame of the home that may have caused the entire structure to collapse. In these cases, it may be difficult to discern what the original frame of the house looked like prior to the damage due to the deformation of the walls. There will likely be major damage and possibly complete structural collapse. When a structure's superstructure is completely destroyed or collapses, many of the other elements that we will discuss should be identified as completely destroyed as well. For instance, a collapsed home would require new windows and doors, so even if you identify a fully intact door in the debris around a collapsed house, you would still characterize the damage to doors and windows as 100%, because they are no longer functional and would need to be fully replaced. Damage to roof covering can sometimes be relatively simple to determine, as damage to shingles and other covering elements can often be identified fairly quickly. A home with 0 to 25% damage will likely have minor damage to the shingles or clay tiles that have been blown off the roof from wind. There is generally no damage to the roof sheathing. A home in the 25 to 50% range will have significantly more damage to roofing elements, such as shingles or tiles. Often, you may see large sections of shingles blown off or some minor damage to sheathing, but a roof whose structure is more or less still in place. When damage to sheathing has taken place, it is likely that you may begin to approach the 50 to 75% damage range. If more than 50% of the roof has been blown off or damaged in a significant way, this is an indicator of fairly severe damage. Damage of 75% or more to the roof entails significant loss of the entire roof element. Generally, in these cases, most of the roof is gone, and there are wide openings on top of the structure that expose the interior to the elements. If there are parts of the roof still remaining, they are small and most likely do little to protect the structure itself. Exterior finish refers to the siding or exterior covering on the outside of a structure. Damage to the exterior finish is in the 0 to 25% range when there is relatively minor damage to siding that may have been partially torn off by wind or water. There may also be water staining, and some need to either clean up the wall surface or perform minor repairs. In this example, there is a more significant portion of the outside siding that has been blown off the structure, indicating more moderate levels of damage. Overall, much of the exterior remains in place, but probably over 25% of the exterior has been damaged, so the structure would fall into the 25 to 50% range. In a home that has been damaged between 50 and 75% to its exterior finish, the majority of the exterior will have damage that requires replacement of siding or veneer. Major repairs to the wall surfaces will be needed. A home that has sustained over 75% damage to its exterior finish will have lost most of its siding or veneer. Much of the exterior finish will be completely destroyed, and the remainder left in a state where it will likely need to be replaced. Interior finish includes many of the non-structural elements in the home, such as baseboards, molding, and drywall. In homes where the damage is between 0 and 25%, there will be minor impacts to these elements of the home's interior. Some signs of this level of damage include water stains near the baseboard of the walls, indicating that very little water entered above the first floor. In cases where windows are blown out and rainwater entered, there may also be minor damage to interior walls that would fall into this level of damage. Interior finish damage in the range of 25 to 50% would be somewhat more extensive and may include water damage caused by up to around 6 inches of flooding. There may also be some damage to the underside of an elevated structure that could be indicative of this level of damage. Water may seep into drywall above the level of the recorded high water mark in a home impacted by flooding. This could potentially increase the amount of damage that you record. You can see that much of the drywall in this structure was cut away and will have to be replaced due to water damage inside. Typically, homes that experience up to about 3 feet of floodwaters will fall within the 50 to 75% damage level, and much of the wall assembly in these homes will have to be replaced. For homes that experience over 75% damage, you may see a full destruction of the interior of the home that includes the need to replace all the drywall and insulation within the structure, as well as most of the other features that make up the interior finish. You may also see signs of collapsing interior elements. In short, some level of damage will likely have occurred from ceiling to floor. The doors and windows element includes all of the interior and exterior doors and windows of a structure. This structure has a number of windows that were undamaged by the storm event, but the door has recently been replaced, indicating that there was likely minor damage to the base of the door, possibly from flooding. When this element is in the 0 to 25% range, generally only some of the doors and windows in a structure have been impacted, while others remain fully intact. In the photo on the right, which represents a structure whose doors and windows were damaged in the 25 to 50% level, flooding reached above the level of the door, as noted by the sandbags in front of the door. Since the windows are low and roughly in line with the high water mark of this structure, it is likely that some moderate damage impacted doors and windows in this home. However, they may not need to be fully replaced in all cases, since the high water mark is only about 6 inches above the first floor. Here you can see that a majority of the structure's windows have either been blown out or floodwaters reached high enough that they will need to be replaced. To determine percent damage for this element, it often helps to count the exterior doors and windows and calculate how many must be replaced out of the total number in the house to get a rough estimate of your damage percentage. Homes that need to have nearly every door and window replaced will fall into the over 75% damage level. These homes have often been impacted by a very high wind event or flooding, and while the superstructure of the home may be standing, doors and windows may have been heavily damaged. Cabinets and countertops are frequently impacted by floods at a 0 to 25% level when there is less than 4 inches of water above the first floor. In this case, impacts are generally only to the lower level of cabinets and not to the counter or wall cabinets. Structures impacted by high winds or infiltration from rainwater when windows are shattered may also fall into this level of impact. At higher levels of flooding, there may be greater impacts to cabinets and countertops, and this may increase the damage level to 25 to 50% range. In this case, there may be significant damage to lower cabinets. There may also be some damage to counters or wall cabinets, depending on the type of event and damage source. When floodwaters rise up into the range of around 3 feet, there may be a jump in damage percentages, as all lower cabinets and countertops may need to be replaced. Many homes with this level of flooding will be in the 50 to 75% damage range, as many wall cabinets may remain undamaged. However, once wall cabinets have been damaged, it is far more likely that the damage level will be in the over 75% range. Whether from flooding or other sources of damage, when there are impacts to both the wall and lower cabinets in a home, the damage percentage is likely to be on the higher end. Floor finish is often an all or nothing damage determination when it comes to flooding events, because if the water level is higher than the first floor elevation, it is very likely the entire floor will need to be replaced. However, there may be some situations where only some rooms in the house are flooded, or where the style of floor, such as tile, only requires cleaning rather than full replacement. It could also be that rainwater infiltration or a fire only impacts certain areas or rooms in the home. For homes where the flooring is tile and may just need cleaning and not full replacement, damage levels may be lower and in the 0 to 25% damage range. For homes where flooring may not need full replacement or where only certain rooms have been impacted by floodwaters or other types of damage, the damage level may be in the 25 to 50% range. Homes in the 50 to 75% damage range for floor finish will have major damage to much of the structure, and most rooms will require a full replacement of the floor. However, there may be some rooms where full replacement is not necessary. For example, a home with just 1 or 2 rooms on the second story may require floor replacement in all areas on the first floor, but not on any second story rooms. When damage levels are over 75%, it is likely that all the flooring in the home needs to be replaced, as there is major damage to floor sheathing and coverings. You may also notice that the floor is partially or completely collapsed in some areas, signifying its instability. For plumbing damage in the 0 to 25% range, you may only note a need to sanitize and clean pipes around plumbing fixtures, such as showers or bathtubs. This damage may have occurred due to backflow contamination after a flood event, or from rainwater infiltration. While some homeowners may decide to replace plumbing fixtures or pipes that are unsanitary, if simply cleaning these fixtures would return them to a safe, healthy, and functional state, the damage should be considered relatively minor. In homes where plumbing damage is in the 25 to 50% range, there would likely be some damage to pipes, especially those at or near grade. These pipes may be broken and require replacement, while the majority of the plumbing infrastructure in the home remains intact and usable. When damage to plumbing becomes more severe, it may be classified in the 50 to 75% range and require larger scale replacement of the home's plumbing infrastructure. There may have been significant backflow issues that caused damage to plumbing fixtures and/or the water heater that may have been damaged or replaced. In this example, you can see a home where the damage level is likely in the range over 75%. The floodwaters in this home were damaging enough to cause a need for full-scale replacement of plumbing fixtures and pipes. The sanitation concerns were also serious, so this structure was classified as having major damage. Electrical damage is especially a concern in the wake of flooding events, or in any scenario where water has infiltrated the house and potentially made contact with electrical systems, including outlets, wiring, or circuit breakers. In a home that is only damaged in the 0 to 25% range, there may be some impacts to minor electrical components or wiring, but most will have not been affected. This is often due to rainwater infiltration, where small amounts of water impact only certain parts of the system. When floodwaters rise above the receptacles and outlets, homes will likely be in the 25 to 50% damage level. Since most standard outlets are at 18 inches, this is the typical flood level to be on the lookout for when analyzing a structure to determine if outlets have been impacted. When flooding exceeds 18 inches or there is more significant damage to major components of the system, the damage level may reach into the 50 to 75% range. In these cases, there will be much higher damage to wiring and electric boxes on the inside and outside of the house. Damage levels over 75% occur when a large majority of the wiring and electrical components have been inundated by water or were damaged by another source, such as a major fire. High water marks over 3 feet are generally a good indicator that most of the electrical system has been damaged and will need to be replaced. As a reminder, only damage to permanent or major appliances should be counted in your damage percentage for this element. Damage in the 0 to 25% level would usually entail minor damage to appliances that would only need to be reconditioned or cleaned and do not require replacement. Damage in the 25 to 50% level would include some significant damage to floor appliances that may make them unusable and in need of replacement, but most of the appliances in the home are still functional and undamaged. This may be something that you run into, especially in two-story homes, where some appliances may be on the second story and remain undamaged. Similarly, damage in the 50 to 75% range would mean that there have been some impacts to many of the appliances, but that some remain undamaged or are in a state that they could be sanitized or easily reconditioned. In short, it is important to gauge how many appliances are in the home and where they may be within the home to determine the level of damage. Damage over 75% typically occurs in high levels of flooding or when the home has sustained major damage and all of the built-in appliances in the home are in need of replacement. The final element to evaluate is the HVAC system. In the 0 to 25% range, you may see a condenser unit that needs to be replaced or repaired, or there may be some damage to crawlspace ducts or other minor damage to the system. Keep in mind that the condenser unit that is often found on the outside of the house is not the entire HVAC system that you should be evaluating. There is typically an interior unit that contains a furnace, as well as ductwork that circulates the air. In the 25 to 50% range, there may be more significant damage to the condenser unit, or there may be some damage to the interior unit or ductwork. Keep an eye out for mold that may have developed in the ductwork or other parts of the HVAC system that may require cleaning or repair and increase the damage level. When parts of the HVAC system have to be replaced, such as large portions of the ductwork, this may be an indicator of damage in the range of 50 to 75%. High floodwaters can often be the cause of a need to remove and replace ducts. Damage over 75% usually occurs when there is significant damage to the home and the entire HVAC system is destroyed or needs to be replaced completely, including ducts, compressor unit, and interior equipment. As we move into non-residential damage percentages, a reminder that this guidance should be used as a starting point for inspectors, but it will not be able to provide all the answers for every structure you are evaluating. Some of the photos may show certain types of structures to illustrate key points, but there will be many variations between this and what you see in the field. As with the residential example, many of the photos in the slides that follow are from damage that occurred in coastal areas, and some buildings in these areas may be better designed to resist damage from storm events than others. This is something to be on the lookout for as you are inspecting a structure. In previous modules, we discussed some of the differences between the elements that you will evaluate for a non-residential structure versus a residential structure. Those listed here are the elements that you will evaluate for non-residential structures. As you would for a residential structure, you will look at each element separately and make a percent damage determination within the SDE tool. The tool will then automatically calculate the overall damage percentage of the structure for you. Since many of the elements we evaluate in non-residential structures are similar to those that are evaluated for residential structures, you will be looking for the same types of damage in many cases. For example, you will evaluate foundation damage for a non-residential structure in the same way that you would for a residential structure. Structures in the 0 to 25% range will likely only have limited erosion or scour around the base, and there will not be any physical damage to the foundation itself or displacement of foundation walls. The photo on this slide would fall into this range as there is limited damage to the foundation with almost no damage to the structure's base. In the 25 to 50% range, you may notice some scour and erosion, or there may even be some minor cracking in the foundation walls. However, overall, the foundation will be stable and intact, and there will not be any displacement between the superstructure and the foundation. In this slide, you can see an example of a structure that had a significant structural collapse and would clearly fall within the range of damage over 75%. Its foundation is cracked, and there is severe displacement where the structure has moved off its base. By comparison, a structure that is between 50 and 75% damaged may have significant cracks in the foundational walls and severe scouring or erosion, but would appear to still be supported by its base. However, upon further examination of the structure, you may note that there is some instability and the structure is not safe to enter. Evaluating superstructure damage for non-residential structures is also similar to evaluating it for residential structures, in that you should be focused on the frame of the building. A structure with only minor wall damage and no distortion or deformation of the framing would fall into the 0 to 25% damage range. In this case, the structure will generally appear undamaged from the outside. Damage in the 25 to 50% range would include some weakening of structural support systems, such as studs. It may also include breakage or loss of several of these support elements, but the damage will be moderate, and in general, the structure would remain standing as damage would be restricted to only a few areas and not the full extent. The structure in the left photo demonstrates an example of a building with 50 to 75% damage. You can see that several of the walls have been ripped off and the integrity of the structure is probably in question. There may also be some evidence of frame deformation and other visible structural issues, even though the structure may still be standing. Damage over 75% often entails the partial or full collapse of a structure, and it will be evident that there is extensive damage due to missing or open walls and severe frame deformation. The structure in the photo on the right is an example of one that falls within this range, as even though it is still standing, there is significant distortion of the framing that would put it in the over 75% damage range. Roof cover damage can also be evaluated in the same way for a non-residential structure as for a residential structure. Roof damage is frequently the result of wind damage, and a good starting place to look for this type of damage is around the corners of the edges of the roof line, where wind pressures are highest. Roofs that are in the 0 to 25% range will not have much visible damage to the roof covering, and there may only be minor damage to flashing or other small components. Damage in the 25 to 50% range would display some additional impacts to the roof covering, with higher levels of damage to flashing and the eaves of the roof. As the photo to the right demonstrates, there would not typically be damage to the sheathing of the roof in this range, and the roof would remain more or less intact structurally. In the range of 50 to 75% damage, there will be significant loss of roof covering, and you may begin to see some damage to the sheathing of the roof. Large sections of the roof may have been torn off by the wind in this scenario, but other sections may remain in place and cover parts of the structure, such that the complete replacement of the roof would not be necessary. When damage levels exceed 75%, most of the roof covering and sheathing will have been damaged or completely torn off from the structure. There will be major exposure of the interior of the structure to the elements, as the roof will be mostly removed from the structure or otherwise ineffective. This will result in the need for full replacement. The interiors element of a non-residential structure tends to encompass a number of elements that are broken out separately in a residential assessment. Items such as floor finish are counted as part of the interiors element and should be assessed accordingly. Since this element is broad and covers a number of interior features, it is important to keep in mind all of the different components you will be assessing as you make your damage determination. In the 0 to 25% range, you may only see minor water stains or damage along baseboards and to doors in a flood event. Or you may note that only certain parts of a large structure have been damaged by a fire or high wind event. In short, the damage will be minor and often restricted to only cleanup or small-scale repairs. Structures that have been damaged in the 25 to 50% range will have more significant damage to the interior, and the floor may have been completely destroyed from flooding. There may also be some damage from water infiltration to walls or other interior features such as molding. Other permanent features such as machinery that are considered part of the structure may also be impacted in some cases. For damage in the 50 to 75% range, there will be more serious damage to walls and ceilings, with a need to replace much of the interior. In some cases, parts of the roof may have been torn off, exposing the interior to rain or other elements, and causing major impacts to the drywall, doors, and flooring. Damage over 75% would appear similar to the photo on the left, as there will be almost total destruction of the walls and interior, requiring a full replacement of these features. Structures in this range will require a major overhaul inside, and there will likely be exposed structural elements and at least some damage to the superstructure as well. Plumbing damage to a non-residential structure may appear differently depending on the type of non-residential structure. Some industrial facilities may have a separate area where water and electrical systems are managed, and this area will need to be evaluated for damage that may have occurred there. The photo on this slide shows a pump room from a non-residential facility, but only minor damage has occurred to the plumbing in this structure. There are some signs of standing water, but in general, the area will just need cleaning and sanitation, as there does not appear to be any physical damage to the piping. This would put the damage level into the 0 to 25% range. A structure in the 25 to 50% damage range for plumbing may have experienced some backflow or contamination, and it is possible that there may be some minor damage to piping. Often these pipes are minor lines, or there is only damage in a few locations, so the entire system is generally still intact. Damage in the range of 50 to 75% would often include damage to major plumbing features such as sinks or cleaning equipment. Be on the lookout for any features that use water and the distribution lines that feed those features. If these are damaged and in need of replacement, damage levels will be much higher than if these same features simply needed to be sanitized and are still in good working order. As with residential structures, indicators of damage over 75% usually include the need to carry out a full-scale replacement of the piping system, as well as any plumbing fixtures. Plumbing lines within non-residential structures can sometimes be more complex than those in residential structures. Be sure to account for all the plumbing features in these structures as you make your damage determination. As with plumbing systems, electrical systems in non-residential buildings can also be complex, and there are frequently separate areas or rooms where electrical systems are managed. The photo on the left shows an undamaged secondary switchgear system that would be classified in the 0 to 25% damage range. Damage in this range might require replacement of minor wiring, but major features or components would remain unaffected. If there has been some damage to receptacles or outlets, especially from flooding or rain, damage will likely fall in the 25 to 50% range. The right photo shows an outlet that was damaged after about 18 inches of flooding impacted the structure. In this range, damage is still somewhat limited to wiring or other small features such as receptacles. There would not be damage to major features such as junction boxes. In the left photo, you can see that there has been some damage to major features of the structure, such as the circuit breaker, which is the heart of the building's electrical system. Damage to these types of features would indicate that there is likely damage in the 50% to 75% range. If there has been full-scale damage to the entire electrical system, including those major features and the wiring of the building, there may be damage over 75%. The photo to the right shows a switchgear system that was completely flooded by over 5 feet of water. This level of damage would fall into the over 75% range due to the level of replacement that would be necessary within the entire electrical system. The final element of a non-residential evaluation is the HVAC system. Although HVAC systems in non-residential structures may be more complex than those in residential structures, the way they are evaluated is much the same. Again, in large facilities, there may be a central housing room where HVAC components are located, and this will need to be evaluated in detail. Also, in some non-residential buildings, some components of the HVAC system may be located on the roof, so be aware of damage to those features as well when performing your evaluation. HVAC systems that have been damaged in the 0 to 25% range generally have only minor damage to certain components or potentially to a few ducts. There would likely not be much damage to boilers, furnaces, or condensers in this range. The photo on the left shows a structure that experienced significant flooding, but all major components have been elevated above the flood level, so while there was other damage to the structure, the HVAC system suffered no damage. A structure in the 25 to 50% range for HVAC may have some additional duct damage, or there may be some minor or moderate repairs needed to get the HVAC components back to functioning. The photo on the right shows a system that experienced some minor flooding, but most of the overall distribution system remained untouched. Damage in the 50 to 75% range would usually mean that there is a need to remove and replace large parts of the duct system, and there will also likely be some damage to the actual HVAC equipment. The left photo shows an example of a mechanical room where floodwaters damaged a number of components that ultimately needed to be replaced. Damage over 75% typically means that nearly the entire HVAC system will need to be replaced, including all equipment. The right photo shows a structure whose rooftop HVAC system was blown off the roof by high winds. This system was completely destroyed and would indicate that there may be damage over 75%. Thanks for watching. This training is one of a 10-part series. Please continue to Module 8.